He'd had clients and meetings. There had been daily interactions with people. As a U.S. Deputy Marshal assigned to Task Force Phoenix, he sometimes went days without speaking out loud. After seeing the happy family that should have been his, he needed to feel connected to someone, if only for a night. The usual twinge of disappointment washed over him at the idea of sleeping with a stranger. He could forgive Caroline for getting married and moving on. She thought he was dead, but Dane didn't have the luxury of that freedom. In his mind, he was still married. Regardless of how tense and strained that marriage had become before it ended with his fake death, he wasn't the type of man to walk away. Tonight, he granted himself permission from his list of reasons. Not only was he no longer legally married, but he was not the same person Caroline had married 11 years ago. He had a different identity, a different job, and lived a much different life. No longer the young executive who was eager to please, he was now a hardened 35-year-old marshal who'd been trained to kill and had used that training 6 times in the last 5 years. Time had moved on, and they'd both changed. As much as it bothered him, he knew deep in his heart that if he'd stayed, they wouldn't still be married. They'd been headed for divorce. He'd just been too stubborn to say it, and she'd refused to give up her pretense of living the perfect life. It didn't matter that they were miserable. If they appeared happy, they were. The walls of the bar were covered with the normal sports memorabilia. It appeared hockey was the owner's favorite. The place was crowded, but naturally there were no lone women at the bar waiting for him to walk in. That would have been too easy. He sat next to a group of people and nodded in greeting. A few minutes later, he had inserted himself into their conversation and was having a good time. Feeling someone brush up against him from the other side, he turned to see a gorgeous brunette sit down. "Was someone sitting here?" she asked when she noticed him looking at her. Dane had tossed the mustache as soon as he was out of town, but the residue from the adhesive pulled as he smiled. "No, help yourself." There was only one seat available next to him, which meant she wasn't expecting anyone to join her. Digging through her purse, she smiled at the bartender. "Can I get a beer? The special would be great." She pulled some money out and stacked it on the bar in front of her, the international sign she planned to stay a while. In a matter of minutes, they were chatting easily, and she had shared her story. Divorced, not looking for anyone. Lena Scott was focusing on her career in design, and she was in town for a meeting. It had gone well, but now she was second-guessing everything because they hadn't called her back yet. She took a sip of her beer and looked at him expectantly. Right. She wanted him to share. Normal people expected a person to reciprocate. He swallowed down the urge to tell her the truth and pushed the lies out of his mouth. "I'm in sales, just passing through." That was the extent of his story. He kind of blanked out while studying her eyes. They were multicolored, gold, green, blue, and gray, all mixed together in a kaleidoscope of colors. "Are you married?" she asked. He shook himself from the hypnotic trance so he could focus. No, I'm not," he answered with a smile. Things were definitely looking up. Chapter 3. Lena Scott smiled back at the man sitting next to her, tamping down her acute nervousness. She'd expected this to be easier. There'd been a time, years ago, when meeting a guy in a bar hadn't made her panic. It had been easy to start up a conversation and find a common interest. All over the world, millions of people spent their Saturday evenings playing out this tried-and-true method of seeking out companionship. Unfortunately, she wasn't really here for companionship. She had a very different motive, and it was that motive that caused her voice to shake when she'd asked him if he was married. She let out the breath she was holding when he answered in the negative. It wouldn't be the first time a man lied about having a wife when meeting a woman in a bar. But she believed him. About that part, at least. The rest, she wasn't certain. Sales? She didn't get that vibe. The way he'd brushed over her questions to turn them back on her convinced her he wasn't who he was pretending to be. Not that she should judge. She wasn't in Colorado for a meeting. She wasn't a designer. And she wasn't going to sleep with him, despite the attraction that spiked when she looked into his warm brown eyes. At another time, she might have been interested in the lean muscles, the dirty blonde hair, and bright smile. But she had a